Good evening. The hour of 6:30 p.m. having arrived, I will call to order this regular meeting of the Joint Planning Board and Planning Licenses and Development Committee. Anyone wishing to view a copy of the agenda and supporting materials will find it on the city website. If you are in our audience tonight, you may access the agenda from any mobile device. Copies of the printed agenda are available in the wall pockets just as you entered the meeting room. To receive electronic copies of future agenda packets, please go to the homepage and subscribe to the city meetings email list. The public and other board members will be recognized to ask questions and make comments on the agenda item under discussion. After being recognized, all remarks are to be made through the chair. Anyone who wishes to address the committee is asked to go to one of the microphones in the room and identify themselves by name and address prior to speaking. Will the staff please conduct the roll call?
All right, for the Planning Board, Harold Farrington,
Here.
David Orgaz,
Here.
Mayor George Hansel,
Here.
Councilor Mike Remy, Emily Levine Bernier, Ryan Clancy, Roberta Mastrogiovanni,
Here.
Armando Rangel,
Here.
and then for alternates, Gail Summers, Brandon Markelon, Tammy Adams, and Kenneth Cost.
Here.
Thank you. And then for PLD, Kate Bosley,
Here.
Michael Giacomo, Phil Jones,
I'm here.
Raleigh Omerad,
Here.
and Mr. Chair, we have quorum for both bodies. If you'd like to invite Mr. Cost to participate as a voting member for the Planning Board, there's space to do so.
Thank you, Mary. Yes, at this time, I would like to ask Mr. Cost to be a voting member for the purposes of this meeting. Thank you. So let's, first order of business is reviewing the minutes of our previous meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the August 14 meeting?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd move to adopt the minutes as presented.
I'll second.
Thank you. Are there any questions, comments, or changes to the minutes? Seeing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes? Any opposed? Meeting minutes are approved. Thank you. At this time, I'd like to move to a public workshop. And the public workshop is for an ordinance 0-2023-16 relating to permitted uses in the downtown core, downtown growth and commerce districts. Petitioner, City of Keene Community Development Department, proposes to amend Section 8.3.2 of Article 8 of the Land Development Code to add a definition for charitable gaming facility and amend Table 8-1, Table 4-1, and Table 5.1.5 to display charitable gaming facility as a permitted use in the downtown growth district and commerce district. In addition, the petitioner proposes to amend Section 8.4.2.c.2.a of Article 8 of the LDC to remove drive-through uses as a permitted use by special exception in the downtown core district. At this time, I'd like to invite the petitioner to present the proposal.
Good evening, Chair, members of the Planning Board, and members of the PLD. Jesse Rounds, Community Development Director. I'm going to put up a slideshow. I just stole the cables from the laptop that was set up, so hopefully there won't be a problem. Uh-oh, I hear running. That means there may be a problem. Oh, it's not in. Sorry. pull it up on the other laptop if necessary. But while we're waiting, I will just go over the broad generalities. And I thought a PowerPoint would be helpful because I think this is pretty complicated, both the state law and what we're proposing. The definition is a little bit complicated, but I think what we're proposing to do is very simple. Let's see if it goes up. Do you want me to just switch it back to this other one?
Yeah.
Okay, of course. Yeah, of course. No, that's my fault. Especially because I didn't talk to you. Oh, boy. It's not gonna work. Okay, I'll pull up a map and when we talk about the map part, I promise there will be visuals.
Something came up, Jesse.
Yep.
Yeah, I can't get to my presentations though, I don't think. Yeah. So, I'll just pull up a map online. It's okay, I can't get to the, my presentations because they're on, like, our department drive, so. It's no big deal. Make it work.
Can you email this to me? I can pull it up on my end.
Pardon me, everyone.
Committee meeting tomorrow. January 3rd is the first session. No. I guess maybe I won't come to more. It was boring. It was, yeah, it was about windshields, tinting windshields.
All right, it's on its way. We'll see if I can get there. But, interim. What's gonna happen?
There we go.
Nope. Yep. All right, so you'll note there's an error on that slide. It's 2023-16 is the presentation that I'm gonna speak to, but let me see if I can, oh, no, I don't have the ability to move the slides. But anyway, so on the next slide, thank you. I just want to talk a little bit about our zoning code and try to explain why we're proposing this change. So the Keene zoning code is permissive, and what does that mean? It's sort of the opposite of what I would consider the term permissive meaning. It means that it permits exactly what it says it permits, and therefore, if it doesn't say a specific use, that use is not allowed. If it doesn't define that use, it's not allowed. However, there's a little wiggle room there in that new uses that aren't defined, if they're very similar to a defined use, after interpretation by the zoning administrator, are allowed. And so that's really what we want to do with our ordinance changes, and that's why we come to the joint committee to work out these details when we come upon a use, a new use, or a use that needs better definition. We propose an ordinance change, and that's where our opportunity to work with you and work with the community through this process right here to make those changes, to better define uses in our community so that people have a chance to say what their city should look like. So this is exactly as it's supposed to work, and also I think it really is, it gets at the whole point of the permissive zoning code. We define exactly what's allowed, so when a new use comes along, we have an opportunity to talk about the uses we allow in our community. So currently, what we're considering tonight, charitable gaming facilities, are allowed under, on the next slide, are allowed under recreation and entertainment facilities indoor. And that's because when the first charitable gaming facility came into Keene, they, were proposed as a new use, and the zoning administrator said, I don't know where this fits. It fits under this definition. And I wanted to point out what this definition says, because I think it really illustrates how this is sort of a shoehorned in use. So what I noted when I looked at this, a facility for spectator and participatory uses conducted within an enclosed building, including but not limited to. That's the whole definition part, is that very beginning. The rest of it is a list of uses. And casino or charitable gaming facility or bingo hall doesn't appear in any of those, in any of that list. And so it's pretty specific about what it allows. And so I think what we're proposing is, hey, this is an opportunity for us to define a use that's growing across the state, that's appearing in various communities, and I think this is our opportunity to say, hey, let's try and better define this. And I did also want to point out where this is permitted now. I think in our next map, or next slide, I have a map. I hope there's a map. If there's not, I can pull it up. Okay, this was an earlier draft. I apologize, I sent her the wrong one. But I think the important part is it's permitted in downtown core, downtown growth, downtown institutional, commerce, commerce limited, and business growth and reuse. And so the downtown zones, downtown core is our Main Street area. Downtown growth is the areas on the sort of south side of Main Street, south side of the historic part of Main Street, going east and west from that. And then downtown institutional is Keene State. And commerce is West Street, the Main Street south of 101. And I will pull up a map of these in a moment, I promise. And then Commerce Limited is some of our more auto-oriented car dealership zoning. And then business growth and reuse is really intended to be neighborhood oriented, but sort of larger, light industrial sort of stuff that works with a neighborhood though. So those are the areas where those recreation and entertainment facilities indoor are permitted now. On the next slide. Oh, wow. That was a big jump. I feel like nope, that's my fault. Oh, yeah. If you could go back one slide. Okay, so this is what we're proposing now for our definition. a facility licensed in accordance with the requirements of RSA 287D, which is the RSA that, the state statute that defines charitable gaming in the state, and operated by a licensed gaming operator, which is a defined term in the RSA, as defined, like I said. And then any facility operated by a person or entity by the lottery, licensed by the Lottery Commission. And then the one carve-out I would say is at the end, does not include games licensed under RSA 287E. And that section is specific to bingo and Lucky 7. There are a bunch of rules related to bingo and Lucky 7 that we could get into if we want to, but it is defined separately, and I wanted to focus on charitable gaming facilities larger than that. So that's where the definition goes, and I think really what we're getting at here is this is a licensed use by the state. This is not like a bowling alley or a movie theater or any of the other uses that exist within the entertainment recreation facility indoor. This is a licensed use that's defined separately and doesn't occur very often. And so we thought this is an opportunity to define it, to separate it out, and to treat it and to allow it to be in places in the city. And we need to do that. That's, again, getting back to that permissive zoning. If we know a use is growing in our community, or the chance of it is coming into our community, we ought to talk about it, define it, and then see where it needs to go. And in that case, what we're proposing is to locate it in downtown growth and in commerce. And Asa, if you could switch to the laptop that's here with me, I'll pull up our maps. Thank you. So I'm going to zoom in here. Pardon me for people who get car sick. So, as I noted before, the current downtown or entertainment recreation facility indoor is permitted in downtown core, which is right downtown, downtown growth, which is either side of downtown core. It's also permitted in downtown institutional, which, as I said, is part of Keene State, and then also in BGR, which is over here in East Keene, and then Commerce, which is the salmon color, and Commerce Limited, which I'll try and point out as I zoom out a little bit. But you'll note that Commerce is generally around some of our main roads, and it's some of our more auto-oriented businesses, meaning large parking lots. This is zooming all the way out, but you can see there's a little bit of Commerce up here in the north part of the city, but generally it's located right around downtown where we get a lot of car traffic, and there's a lot of parking lots, and there's a lot of large buildings. And that's also why we thought downtown growth was appropriate as a location, because that's where we get our bigger buildings. The code allows, the LDC allows for infill with a larger building lot line to lot line, but it also has a lot of parking. Not necessarily required. Actually, the LDC does not require parking in the downtown growth, but there is parking there. So I think there are a lot of opportunities here in these two districts for the growth of this industry if it plans to grow, if that is the way it goes. With that, I'm gonna switch to drive-throughs, but I thought I could I don't know if this is okay, but I wanted to pause and see if there are any questions. That's a lot of information, so.
Yeah, I think it makes sense
Okay.
to pause here and see if board members have any questions for the petitioner. Mr. Cost?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I mean, the intent of this makes a lot of sense. There's a use that doesn't fit into any of our zoning. It seems to fit into that category quite well. The entertainment seems to be allowed in a lot of different places, but I understand it's a broader use. I guess just from hearing this, and what you said about the downtown growth being a place where large buildings and development would go, I see that as a little different, and because I think the downtown growth, well, the casinos, again, I don't know that we're going to get a Mohegan Sun. We're not going to get a huge casino here. We'll probably get smaller kind of businesses. I don't know that, but I'm expecting that's probably the case. And so if the downtown growth is meant for larger, and then I read something and it's still supposed to be walkable and all the other parts connected to the city, it doesn't seem to me to fit as well. It fits perfectly in the pink commerce, I think. Lots of parking, lots of storefronts, lots of places to build. So that makes great sense for something like this to go there if it's going to go anywhere. So I just wanted to express a little hesitation on my part on the downtown growth
Understood.
recommendation.
So all that is, yeah, I think downtown growth has a lot of the same description as downtown core, downtown edge, transition. But I think one of the things I didn't mention was that as of right now, the places we've seen charitable gaming facilities develop are in commerce and downtown growth. And so part of our thought process was, obviously, this is where developers feel comfortable or business owners feel comfortable placing those businesses. This is where they see the market, that sort of thing. So we thought, okay, if that's where they're seeing the opportunity, then let's allow it in those areas. And I think, your point is well taken, that the downtown, the way we talk about the downtown in both the master plan and in the LDC is highlighting the unique walkable nature of the area.
Mr. Engel?
I just want to understand a little bit more about the charitable gaming facility. You said this is a licensed situation. So are we talking about a business that can obtain this license and then can run charitable games out of their currently existing business, or it's some charitable organization who purchases a building for the purpose of running charitable games?
So the way that the state statute is written is impenetrable as far as I can tell. I spent long time reading it, and there are tiers of licenses. As a charitable organization, you do have to obtain a license to do this, but generally how it's operated across the state is a business obtains what's called an operator license, and then the charitable organizations contract with that operator. And so to Mr. Cost's point, in most cases, these are small businesses. These are reasonably small spaces. They're not building the Mohegan Sun. They're building smaller spaces, or they're a bar or a restaurant that adds this as a use, and then they contract with the charitable organizations in order to operate.
Councilor Bosley?
Thank you. So I would just like to point out here as well, before we get to the public comment, so that the information, we can discuss it as a whole, is that this ordinance doesn't trigger until the business would have to obtain a license, but it doesn't trigger until, I think that there are 5 or more gaming devices. And so less than that, if a business wanted to have less than that and obtained their correct license, they could do that as a secondary use, and it wouldn't be a primary use, and it wouldn't trigger this ordinance from not allowing it. This is really to, when we're discussing big facilities where there would be many, many machines or games or things happening. And so, someone who wanted to just add this in as a small thing wouldn't necessarily be prohibited by this ordinance.
So I do want to correct that, and I think I, in a previous conversation, may have brought up the 5 slot machines or whatever. So technically, the slot machines are apparently prohibited. There's a version of slot machines that are allowed.
Okay.
But it's 5 days operating, that is the minimum that they're allowed. Basically, you can operate a charitable gaming facility for fewer than 5 days a year and not receive a license, or not obtain a license, if that makes sense. It's weird, and I apologize. I think I misled a
So,
number of people.
As I read through the ordinance, and I'll have to look quickly, it does state that the state that there is a provision that has to do with the amount of, not the amount of days that they're operating, but the amount of gaming units or types of gaming.
Yeah, I think I if I put
Let
that
me
in,
see if
I
I can
erred.
find that.
Yeah, okay.
We'll come back to it.
Other questions? Mr. Engel?
Just out of curiosity, I just wonder about the origination of this,
Sure.
this motion. I realize that it's not something that had been included in the permissions, but there are a lot of other things that hadn't been.
Yeah.
So what was it that landed on this?
Absolutely. So, and you're right, that there are a lot of different uses that we are silent on. So 2 things really. One is that we've been seeing them grow across the state. And in talking with other cities, they're seeing this grow in places they didn't expect it to grow. And so in talking with them, I think Nashua is one of the few cities that actually defines out charitable gaming facilities as a use so that they can limit where they are located. And so that's one thing. And then the second thing was really so I didn't have a lot of experience with the BGR district. And then I believe it was last year, a property owner there brought this forward, brought forward a change to that definition. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. But I also would say we received a letter from the mayor asking us to look into this. And so, when we get directed, we do this.
Mayor Hanson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this popped on the radar for me back, actually, when Planning Director Rhett Lamb was here, and it must have been 2022 or late 2021, whenever we were adopting the land use code, because someone inquired, I don't remember where that original inquiry came from, but somebody inquired about this. And so I had a conversation with Rhett Lamb at that time, and I said, this isn't defined in the code. What are we going to do about this? And we had sort of a conversation, and he said, let's keep that in mind for the future, but we're right in the middle of passing the big land use code, and it just wasn't a very opportune time to start adding things at that point, since it had already gone to the city council adoption process. And so as legislation has changed in the state and it's become more popular, it was sort of on the list to take care of.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay,
All right.
thank you.
I'll jump into drive-throughs, and to be honest with you, I don't think we need slides for the drive-through section at all. But I will just quickly talk to them. So right now, drive-throughs are permitted in the downtown core. They're permitted in lots of districts, but they're permitted in the downtown core by special exception, which is a process that goes through the zoning board of adjustment. And what we're proposing to do is just remove the ability to get a special exception for a drive-through in the downtown core. That would mean that there would be no future drive-throughs in the downtown core. However, there would be, there are currently 3 or 4 existing drive-throughs, and those would be allowed as a non-conforming use. They would continue to operate, and there are some limited ways they could expand and change while still remaining a legal non-conforming use. And our reasoning really comes down to, again, the definition of the downtown core. We were diving into this. We were talking about where charitable gaming facilities should be located. We kept talking about, walkable neighborhoods. The master plan and the LDC really hammer on that the downtown core should be this pedestrian scale, slow, human, really walkable, walkable neighborhood. And yet there are drive-throughs permitted by special exception, and special exception has some very confusing requirements, and they don't really seem to address things like, is this in a walkable neighborhood? Is this going to impact the day-to-day use of the space as imagined by the community? They're sort of unrelated to that. And so we thought this is an opportunity for us to, again, dig into the code and say, propose a change that we thought the community would like, and we'll see how everyone feels. And that's all I've got. I'm happy to answer questions, happy to look at the map more. This is hard to visualize, I think, and so I think the map is important. And there are a bunch of weird details about charitable gaming and bingo and Lucky Sevens in the state. And I am in no way an expert, but I'm happy to talk about what I know and dig into details if we do head down a road. So, any other questions about
Yeah,
drive-throughs or casinos?
any questions about the drive-through portion? Mr. Cost?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to, the downtown core where drive-throughs wouldn't be allowed, I'm looking at the map. It looks
Yeah.
like it's primarily Main Street and then a little bit of Washington, and it's that bit I'm looking
Yeah,
at.
that's
No
correct.
drive-throughs there.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Councilor Bosley?
Again, we do have drive-throughs in that area already. I can think of a couple of banks that have drive-throughs,
That's
and
correct.
all of those would be grandfathered in.
Yep.
And are there any that, I believe that there's one unpermitted, or a permitted drive-through that is not completed
That
at
is
this point?
correct.
And that would also be grandfathered in?
Yes.
Okay.
There's one facility that has received a special exception, that would, at this point, be allowed.
Thank you for that clarification. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So at this time, I'm going to invite members of the public to offer comments or questions on the proposed ordinance. I'd like to remind you that this is not a formal public hearing, it's a workshop, but we still would appreciate hearing from you. So if someone would like to step forward, please come up to one of the microphones, state your name and address, and let us hear your comments.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me? My name is Michael Atkins. I'm an attorney in Peterborough, New Hampshire with Shaheen and Gordon, and I'm here on behalf of Dory Maston, who's a property owner downtown, to speak in opposition of the ordinance. As some of you may know, this is a very highly regulated state statutory scheme. I would suggest that what you're considering would be preemptive by that state statutory scheme. And as you may know, Ms. Mattson has already moved forward in the application process and already spoken to the city in this regard to utilizing her property in the downtown core area in regard to, in accordance with 287D, having a charitable gaming location. And to pass this currently would not only be preempted, but I would also suggest a regulatory taking, particularly in regard to her property. So again, just speaking in opposition, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Good evening, Jared Goodell, 39 Central Square, number 201. I have some background in charitable gaming. I opened a facility, owned and managed a facility in Keene, charitable gaming facility. I no longer have any interest in that facility now, but I think I can provide some answers to some of the questions that I've heard tonight and that the committee might have and have not asked yet. I think that this is an appropriate, quite frankly, proposal. I think that we've been hearing a lot of debate about downtown and the downtown that we want, especially as it relates to the downtown project. And that is to sort of maintain a level of old school New England, I think, in town. And I think that casinos, clearly I'm a fan of them, but I don't think that they belong on, Main Street in downtown Keene. And as I understand it, this would prohibit them. Not for any, bad reason other than, casinos, are bright, they're loud. There's a lot of in and out traffic. There's a lot of traffic that stays for quite a long time. And I think that that's contrary to what we want downtown, specifically as it relates to parking, where it comes to, the 2-hour time limits at meters and this perceived lack of parking downtown. And people, when they go to a casino, generally stay for a while. They might stay for clearly more than 2 hours, 3-4 hours. They eat, they play games, they enjoy games for quite some time. And I would direct the committee's attention, if they want, to ITE traffic data and parking data on that to support that assertion. I just don't think that they really fit in downtown. As somebody who also lives downtown, and, I think that the noise that's generated by, people cheering when they win, or the noise of machines, I think that you'd also have a disruption to the residential life on 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floors, and I could be somebody impacted by that. Now, it's not often that I would come in front of a committee like this and say that an ordinance doesn't go far enough. But in this instance, I do believe that this ordinance does not go far enough, as it particularly relates to the exception in the last sentence of the proposal, where it says does not include games licensed under RSA 287E. And I think I understand the intent of the Community Development Department on this, in that they want to preserve the ability for fraternal organizations like the Elks or the American Legion, or even churches who operate bingo games that might exist in the downtown core area, and that do exist in the downtown core area. As it reads on its face, the body of law that encompasses RSA 287E, it seems to pertain only to those fraternal organizations or nonprofit organizations, meaning that they are the only people who can operate games of chance as it relates to bingo or Lucky 7. But that's not true. So that statute does allow for commercial bingo halls, which essentially would allow slot-style-like machines, which are called Lucky 7 machines. If any of you have been to the American Legion or even Wonder Casino prior to last August, you've seen slot-style machines. Those machines are Lucky 7 machines, but to the general public, they appear to be slot machines. Those actually fall under the bingo statute. So under this current proposal, someone could operate a commercial bingo hall and have it be full of these machines. A slot parlor, which I don't believe is really what we want in our downtown. I think that charitable gaming is great in Keene. I think it's great in the state. I think it's invaluable to our local charities. I just don't believe that it belongs downtown. So I would propose that language be added that says, does not include games licensed under RSA 287E, except those operated by commercial bingo halls as defined in RSA 287-E:1 V:(A). That way, commercial bingo halls, or in this case, a slot parlor, wouldn't be allowed to exist in the downtown area. I think this is the time to take care of that. I also just wanted to point out, I think that Mr. Rounds caught it, but there was some confusion about the licensing as it relates to 5 or more days. It is 5 or more calendar days per year. There may be some confusion as it pertains to the number of machines. So there are different rule, both administrative rule and law, when you jump over 50 machines, as it pertains to what they call HHR machines, which are the new style slot machine that falls under a 287 license that this would outlaw. So, the gaming laws in this state, quite frankly, they are rough, right? When this body of law was introduced, it was very restrictive, and over time it's been added to, and things have been sort of tacked on here and tacked on there to sort of create what it is today. And so it's not a clean body of law, and it's somewhat confusing. But I do want to commend the Community Development Department for bringing this up, because there's a battle right now going on in Conway over this exact same issue, and I would urge you all to look into that, where they're having a struggle right now with this very thing, where indoor recreation is their definition that they have now. That's sort of where they've pigeonholed casinos in the past, and they're trying to, after the fact, change that, and it's become a real battle for them. So I think that this is a great time, as gaming is becoming bigger and growing rapidly in this state. The gaming laws have changed drastically in the last 12 months. You've seen large companies come in and buy up most of the operations that exist in this state, and it's growing rapidly. And I think it's wise for the city to take some restrictive action that makes sense. And I think this really does make sense. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has as it pertains to charitable gaming, if you have any.
Thank you. Any questions from?
Thank
Okay, thank you.
Actually, sorry, Mr. Chair, could I didn't quite catch that reference. Could you state that again, the RSA 287E?
Yes, and I'll leave you a copy of it here. It's RSA 287-E:1, number V-A, and that's just the definition of a commercial hall. And I'll leave that with you. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public portion. Thank you. So now we move to the board deliberation, the joint board deliberation. Anyone like to make comments or at this time? Mayor Hansel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do think this makes some sense, and when I think about the master plan and how it defines the downtown and along Main Street, and when I think about the current uses downtown that we've been trying to promote over the years and have been growing over the years, you've got a lot of restaurants, you have some venues like the Colonial Theater, you have retail, which we're trying to promote and make sure that that continues to have a presence along Main Street. And I think this charitable gaming use is inconsistent with those, because all of the uses that we are trying to promote are pretty much geared around the parking program and moving people through the downtown for short stops or going in to see a couple-hour show. And the parking in the downtown area is a shared resource, and so we have to be very cautious and careful as these different uses pop up, that we're not going to upset that ecosystem in a way that would be detrimental to the look and feel of the downtown and the uses that are there. So I think this is in line with that, both on the charitable gaming side, but also the drive-through side. We have to be very careful that we don't have a bunch of, I don't think we're gonna have a bunch of drive-throughs pop up, but we have to be careful that that's not something that happens, because that is both a main artery for pedestrian traffic, for people to stop and do those little visits to the stores, but it's also a throughway for people to move from north to south in the city. And I think as much as it might be nice for us to change that, it's probably not going to change anytime soon, and we have to be cautious of that as well.
Thank you. Other comments?
So I have a motion, Mr. Chairman, if we're ready for that.
Yeah, I think we're ready to entertain the motion.
I would just move to find the proposed ordinance consistent with the 2010 City of Keene Master Plan.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion?
Mr. Chair, sorry to interrupt. I just was curious, because the public workshop phase of the ordinance really is the time, if you do want to make any tweaks or changes to the ordinance, now is the time to do that. So I was just curious if, maybe not, I don't want to like push this on you, but the suggestion from the last speaker from the public regarding the modification to the definition, if you did want to make that change tonight, would be the night to make that. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, that seems to make sense to me. It seems to be consistent with the other part of it. I don't know if you would,
I can work on some language if you want, if you're headed that way.
oh, yeah, please, Councilor Bosley.
Thank you. I was just looking to staff to, I don't know, can you give us a little bit of clarification based on what we heard and what you've read in the state law and how it applies and how it would be or wouldn't be consistent with the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish?
Sure, I can try and get to that. So 287E is as confusing as 287D. And so I could absolutely, reading through it today and previously, I think I came upon the same problem, which is that it's structured in the same way and it allows for an outside business to operate a bingo hall that does all the things that Jared said they did. So I think that the ordinance as worded, or the definition as worded, the use as worded, would allow the planning board and allow the city to, if that use were to come up, the zoning administrator would have an opportunity to say, does a bingo hall fit under charitable gaming, or is it a different use even than that? So there could be that issue, that opportunity for the city to pause and say, is this what we want in the future if this were to come up? However, we do have this open right now. We could, you could add this now as another way to address these large facilities, or not even large facilities, these facilities that are sort of oriented towards gaming specifically, whether it's bingo, Lucky 7, or games of chance. It's absolutely a possibility, and I will admit it's an area I looked at 287E. I talked to the city attorney. I missed it. I missed the possibility of having again, a private operator operating a facility that would be for charitable organizations, but would be focused on bingo and Lucky Sevens. So I think that there's a, yeah, like I said, I think that the definition as it is would allow us to pick this up again later, but this is also an opportunity to address it in the same definition.
Can I go on?
Yes, please. Yeah.
So, does not include games licensed under RSA 287-E. That prohibits this ordinance from shutting down bingo halls, essentially, that are run in the downtown core.
Okay.
What does 287-D:(E1VA state?
So it's 287E. So that's the definite,
287E,
yeah,
colon
287E:1 VA that's the definitions. And so VA is just the definition of a bingo hall. I have it actually, or you might have it in front of you.
Yeah, so I can read the definition. It says 287-E:1, which is definitions. Underneath that, section 5, then AVA. Commercial hall means any hall owned or leased by an individual, corporation, realty trust, partnership, association, or any other person who rents or leases the hall to a charitable organization for the operation of bingo games, excluding halls owned by any charitable organization or governmental subdivision as specified in RSA 287-E:5, V1, or 6, I
So-
guess.
Does that definition then get more clearly to the heart of what we're trying to protect?
I mean, what it would do is, and the reason I excluded 287E when I wrote the definition, or wrote the ordinance language, was really to get at this question of, we wanted to allow charitable organizations to continue to have bingo in the basement of the church or whatever, that used to continue. And so when I read 287E, I thought, oh, this is to protect that same use. And then, this is new information, and I think I didn't realize that it was operated in exactly the same way. They're basically two facilities that do the same thing, through
One-
different means.
One is for charity and one is for
Well,
corporate profit.
No, one is, the charitable gaming facilities are essentially games of chance, poker, roulette, those sorts of things, table games. And then the bingo and Lucky Sevens is bingo and what look, as Jared said, what looks like slot machines. So, again, at the state level, they tried to make this complicated, and they succeeded. By separating these out, I think the intention was that you could have these, you could have a number of Lucky Sevens machines in your bar, and you wouldn't have to have the same license as you'd have to have for poker. And then you could have a poker hall that didn't have these other things, and so it allowed you to have different licenses that focused on different things, so that you could pick and choose.
But I don't know that the spirit of the ordinance is intended to allow
Picking
slot
and choosing.
halls,
It is
or
not.
whatever you want to call them. And I think that that does need to be tuned up.
Yep, I completely agree, and I think we could pretty easily change that language. I mean, we could honestly say, as defined under RSA 287D:1 VII and RSA 287E:1 VA, 5A, whatever. Yeah, that would, yes, I'm working on it now.
Okay.
Give me a moment. Where did that go?
And sorry, just, this is Mary Brenner again. So if the committee is interested in modifying the ordinance, you would need to first vote as a full committee to amend the ordinance and create an A version. So that's only if you want to. If you are comfortable with the ordinance as is, you can move forward. Yep.
I would move to amend the ordinance with the new language.
Second.
Just hold that for a second. Yeah, okay, thanks. Counselor Jones?
Well, now there's a motion on the floor. I guess I can speak to it because it's about those.
Sir,
have a
Councilor Jones, if you
microphone
could
on?
put your mic on. Sorry.
Thank you. Your motion is for the exceptions outside the,
My motion would be to include language that prohibits commercial bingo halls from being on Main Street. I don't know what the wording of that is gonna look like once the development department comes up with language that's appropriate. I think that we have to find a way to protect the church basements, but not allow big commercial halls.
Mr. Chair, I'll let this motion go through and then I'll speak, okay? 'Cause
Okay,
mine wouldn't be an amendment to this motion.
okay. Mr. Rounds, I guess we're waiting for you to, okay, no, that's fine. Just want to be clear on where we are. Mr. Cost?
Thank you. I'm a little, not quite sure where we are at the moment. So is this the time to go back a little bit to one of the core ideas of this change? Of this, putting this land use in, of where these facilities are allowed?
Yeah, we haven't voted. We have a motion, and we have a second motion which amends it. But yeah, if you'd like to comment.
Mr. Chairman, it might be best if we want to move on to a different area of discussion to have the motion and the second pulled off the table so that we can have a more general discussion.
And create
Sure.
additional.
And then put
Okay.
it back, and then you can make the motion again once the language is
Okay.
ready.
Okay, I'll
Fine.
retract my motion.
Okay,
retract my second.
okay. Thank you, Mayor Hansel. All right, Mr. Cost, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So, I mean, I don't want to be a broken record, but I do want to go back to the, what I mentioned way earlier about the downtown growth. And I'm reading the intention of the downtown growth area right here. And it's intended to provide the flexibility needed to create a mixed-use environment suitable for commercial, residential, civic, cultural, open space in areas of downtown where growth is desired, with standards for new construction and infill that complement the walkable urban form of Keens downtown. So I almost, especially close in to Main Street, I don't see that as, as being very different than Main Street. In the future, it will be maybe like a Main Street. It could be another area that we really develop here. And so I'm very, very comfortable with the Commerce District, but I just want to get on the table. I do have a concern with allowing this in the downtown growth. And I would say, I mean, we can't deal with it today, but there are parts of the downtown growth that it can make more sense, maybe further west or something. But as you get closer in, because it's all zoned downtown growth, as you get closer into Main Street, to me, it becomes a problem. So just wanted to
Yeah,
slip that
thank
out
you.
there, so.
Counselor Jones?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Where we make the exceptions for bingo and Lucky Seven to be, I guess in any district, I think probably we might be able to save some time if we also added Keno to that. Right now, Keno is in a lot of cities in New Hampshire, but it was defeated on the referendum 2 times in Keene. I think mostly because the language wasn't very clear on the referendum. But I think there's a possibility Keno could happen one day. And the Lottery Commission calls for Keno to be in any use that has a liquor license. So that could be any part of the city. So that would be the third thing. If it ever happens that Keno is passed on a referendum, we would have to go back and change this ordinance and go through this. It couldn't hurt to put Keno in now.
Staff?
So Counselor Jones is correct. As of right now, the city has passed by referendum or has denied Keno in the city. And yes, future voters, someone could put Keno back on the ballot and future voters could vote to approve it. I'm not sure we can create a definition for a use that isn't permitted by voter decision. I think at the time that a vote was taken and a decision was made to allow Keno, then that decision would have to come back to the city staff, community development, to decide, to run through a process just like this to decide where it would be allowed. I think that would be my concern, is that we try to make this one definition cover everything. At the same time, we can absolutely head in that direction if that's the way people want to go.
Counselor Jones?
Thank you. Yeah, I was just trying to keep us from possibly having to amend later on and go through this, because it would take going through this whole joint committee process and also public hearing and everything else. I was trying to avoid that in the future. I mean, if it doesn't pass the voters, it doesn't make a difference anyway if it's in there or not. And that's the way I was thinking. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's not going to change much.
Yeah, I can see where the staff is coming from, though, that we're permitting a use that's technically not permitted in Keene.
Right.
Permitting in the LDC a use that's not permitted.
And Mr. Chair, just if you're ready, I think we've been talking through what the exact language would be for a motion if the committee does want to make the change that was brought up. And I think it would just be a motion to amend the ordinance to include the definition of commercial hall under RSA 287-E and the definition of charitable gaming facility. And then to create an A version of the ordinance, and then staff would bring that A version back to City Council for the public hearing, and the public would have an opportunity at that point in time to see the exact language. But as long as you give us clear direction on what we would be including in the language, we should be able to move forward.
Okay, thank you. So I think we're ready for an A version then motion. Okay?
I'd like to put my motion back on the table.
Second.
Okay. Okay. Any further discussion?
Can we have the motion, please?
Move to amend the definition of charitable gaming facility to include,
It would be the definition of commercial hall under New Hampshire RSA 287E.
to include the definition of commercial hall under 287E.
E. yeah.
And do I have to include the 1VA? No. Okay.
Which would allow bingo halls in downtown, correct?
Which would prohibit certain types of bingo halls in downtown. If I'm correct in understanding what, that's the intention.
But still allow the church bingos that are still happening.
So a charitable organization that's running a charitable gaming facility would still be allowed, but a for-profit organization that's running a charitable facility would not be allowed. Is that correct? Yes.
Thank you. Thanks for that clarity.
Yep.
Okay.
It's confusing.
Yeah, it's
But I think
complicated.
we clarified.
I think so, too. All right, so I think at this time, we'll move to a vote. I think we'll start with the planning board.
Well, we vote together on this.
We'll vote together on this. Oh, okay, right, for the amendment. Okay, so we'll vote, all vote together on this. So all those in favor of the
Amendment?
amendment? Any opposed? Motion, the amended motion, the amendment is approved, yes.
And Mr. Chair, do we want to discuss the land zones that Mr. Costa brought up? Does anyone have any input?
Sure, at this time, that's fair. Anyone like to make comments further to the point that Mr. Koss brought up about downtown growth? Councilor Omrod?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is, what would be the economic impact if we restricted it from downtown growth? I thought there was some reason why we were including downtown growth. So what would be the economic impact of refusing that, or any complications, because we have current businesses operating there?
So I don't know that we could give you specifics on economic impact. All we can tell you is that to date, there has been a desire to locate these types of uses in the downtown growth district, which what that says to us is that it's a district where at least the folks that operate these are interested in operating them. And in addition, this district has a lot of potential for redevelopment. Unlike the downtown core, which is already very much built out, the downtown growth is an area where it's not built out yet. There's a lot of large parking lots and land where there's old buildings that are kind of going through a process of adaptive reuse. So it seemed to us like there's a lot of opportunity for redevelopment in the downtown growth with new development that has an opportunity to come in and create its own built environment, whereas the downtown core already has a very historic, established built pattern. So that's the difference that we were looking at. I think if we were to exclude this use from the downtown growth, the use that's already there would be legally non-conforming, so it could still continue to operate, but new charitable gaming facilities that wanted to come into Keene would then only have the Commerce District would be the only option for them. And that could be appropriate. Again, we just, as staff, felt that the downtown growth could also be appropriate in addition to commerce, because even though, as Director Rounds mentioned, even though the intent is for that area over time to become more like the downtown core, because it's not fully built out yet, there's still a lot of opportunity for that development to happen.
Mayor Hansel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do appreciate what Mr. Cost is bringing to the table here, because it's a difficult thing to sort of separate out these districts and these different uses. But I also think Mary put it very well, and I'll put it in a slightly different way. But the downtown growth area, to me, the future for that area is yet to be defined in a lot of ways. And over the past few years, as we've been planning and thinking about that building out, there are new sort of ideas that have come up over time about parking garages and there's a lot more space there for parking. So for me, those areas don't have the same kind of problems with these types of facilities as the downtown core, which is fully built out, has an established look and feel and uses that are there that we're trying to promote.
Councilor Bosley?
Thank you. Yes, I would agree with the mayor as well. I think when you look at the shape of that to the west, it does encroach right up close to Main Street, and I think over time you're going to see the Commerce District eke into downtown growth and overlap on the edge, and you're going to see that downtown core eke in and overlap, and those two districts will downtown growth will eventually disappear, and you'll end up with more defined zones there. But that's a natural occurrence, and currently that is, and we've got to let the business sort of figure out what it's going to be down there.
Okay. Thank you. So I think at this time, the planning board will vote. Go ahead.
I'll just make a motion to move that the amended ordinance, the A version of the ordinance, is consistent with Keene's 2010 master plan.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Okay. All those in favor of the planning board only at this point, all those in favor of approving the motion as consistent with the 2010 master plan? Any opposed? Thank you. Motion is approved. It's consistent with the master plan.
And for formality, as usual, there is a public hearing already set, but the Planning Licenses and Development Committee is looking for a motion for a recommendation to formalize that.
I hate this vote, but I'll
I
make that
know.
motion. I've hated it for years.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second on the table. Any questions? That date is set for December 7th. All those in favor? And that's unanimous.
Okay, thank you. All right. Our next agenda item is a presentation by the Southwestern Regional Planning Commission on the Regional Housing Needs Assessment.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Board, and members of the Planning Licenses and Development Committee. Thank you. My name's J.B. Mack. I am the Assistant Director at Southwest Region Planning Commission, right down the street on Ashwalet Street. Tonight, I was talking to staff about offering to provide a presentation on the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. I realized that you have had your own work done with Camoin Associates on a city housing needs assessment. Housing, as I'm sure you discussed when you were looking at the Camoin numbers, is really a regional matter, though. So it's important to look at the perspective of the housing situation around, with the surrounding communities. Tonight, I'm really just gonna, the Regional Housing Needs Assessment is a robust document, and I'm just gonna focus on highlights tonight. I'm happy to take questions along the way if that's the chair's preference, or we can wait until after if that's your preference. But let me just dig in.
Yeah, I think it's fine if you're willing to, that we can entertain questions as you go along.
Okay, great. Southwest New Hampshire Regional Housing Needs Assessment was actually published earlier this year. The last time that that Southwest Region Planning published a Regional Housing Needs Assessment was in 2014, and a lot has happened since then. So we were definitely in need for an update. If you're not aware, state statute requires regional housing needs assessments to be periodically updated. And the reason for that is to provide data and analysis to towns in our respective regions to help inform towns on their housing development, particularly in informing housing chapters of master plans and what kind of housing development you'd like to see in your community. This information in the report focuses on our planning district, which includes all of Cheshire County, 10 towns in Hillsborough County, and the town of Langdon and Sullivan County. If you've had a chance to peruse the report, there's a mix of quantitative and qualitative data. We brought in a lot of data from sources like New Hampshire Housing, U.S. Census, a lot of economic data as well. But we also talked to planning board members, including some people from the city of Keene, on the planning board city of Keene, code enforcement officers, professional planners, real estate agents, anybody that's really involved in with the housing sector, to get their perspective on this issue as well. And it's basically a mix between a reference document and a resource guide that includes data analysis, has some case studies in it, tools and strategies as well. So I encourage you to take a look at the document if you haven't had a chance to do so yet. So my presentation tonight is going to be basically in 4 sections. First, I want to talk about key information and trends associated with the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. And after that, we'll get into key challenges, defining the need, and then some of our key high-level takeaways in the document. First of all, I think it's, maybe a lot of you are already familiar with this, but Southwest New Hampshire originally, we were growing quite fast in the 1970s. We actually grew at a pace of 27% more housing units during the 70s. In the 80s, we grew another 23%. But as we approach modern times, you can see that continued to decline with the orange arrow showing the rate of growth. Such that, and during the 2010s, our housing unit production actually slowed to only about 2% for our entire Southwest New Hampshire. Quite a change in the past decade. One thing that maybe many of you are aware is our housing stock is overwhelmingly single-family detached homes, and those are the most popular, type of housing. When we did our surveys, a lot of people came back and said that's what we want, that's what we need. But what you see is you don't have a diversified housing portfolio necessarily in the Southwest region. It's very much things like duplexes, small multifamily apartments, large apartment buildings, manufactured homes are really kind of underrepresented in the region. On this chart on the left-hand side of the screen there, you'll see differences in housing units in 2010 and 2020, and the gray line shows the change between 2010 and 2020, the rate. And you'll notice that there was a high number of 50 or more units built in the 2010s. I think that has to do actually with the buildings right here in Keene, the Washington Square or Washington Street apartments, and also the conversion of the mill on West Street as well. Because there was such little development, you can see it just skyrockets in terms of percentage increase of that type of housing. But one thing I want to point to is the red numbers there, the duplexes, the triplexes, quadplexes, the smaller buildings that can really tend to fit in. Some housing experts call it middle housing. This is sort of naturally occurring affordable housing where you take advantage of density to have to create more affordable housing, but at a scale that's can fit in many times with single-family unit housing. And that number of housing has actually decreased over the 2010s due to either remodeling or or other reasons. Quarter of our housing inventory in Southwest region is actually was constructed prior to the 1940s and actually represents a older housing stock when compared to New Hampshire and the United States. And a disproportionate number of these 1940s, pre-1940 housing is actually rental housing as well. Older housing units are generally more expensive to live in, especially with respect to wintertime heating costs. And a comparatively older housing stock will result in a disproportionate need to renovate or replace existing units or to make them more energy efficient compared to other parts of New Hampshire and United States. The percent of owner-occupied units to rental units in the region versus New Hampshire or US, we have many more owner-occupied units in Southwest New Hampshire compared to the state and the United States. Keene is an exception to that, which I think Camoin did a good job at explaining that. But half of the communities in the region have ownership rates of actually 84% or more are owner-occupied units. Keene on its own represents over a third of all the rentals in the entire region that we studied. And other communities bearing a larger percentage are shown on the slide here, with Peterborough coming in next at 8%, very big difference there. Swansea, Jaffrey, Winchester, and Walpole. When you look at the numbers 1979 to 2020, the blue versus the orange, there's been a slight pickup in the rate, slightly more growth among renter-occupied units during that time versus owner-occupied. But you can see that owner-occupied units dwarf rental units in the region. The big story with housing, as I'm sure everyone in the room is familiar with, it's been in the newspapers, is the vacancy rates that we have in our region. The New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority put out, when we were doing our regional housing needs assessment, a report suggesting that in Cheshire County we had for 0.7% vacancy rate for rental units in the area. Typically you want to see a 5% vacancy rate. That's a more healthy rate where people have time to make decisions, financial decisions about moving to new locations, have time to move to a new location without being subject to such a small number of potential units to choose from. So the rental units chart is shown on the left, and you can see that 5% rate healthy market we haven't hit since about 2012 or so. So it's been quite some time we've had a unhealthy market. On the right-hand side are census numbers for vacancies for all types of housing units. One thing to be careful of when people are talking about vacancies is there's the census has many definitions for them, and many of those definitions actually have are housing units that are spoken for, whether it's for going to be for migrant workers, people that have just bought a home, or people that have just decided to rent a home, the unit's still vacant, or if the units are seasonal or recreational use, for example. The only, when you're looking at the bar graph on the right-hand side, the real vacancies are the ones that are vacant units for sale and vacant units for rent. When you take those numbers and apply it to all of our housing units in the region, it gets to about 1.6% of the units are actually vacant. A healthy, as I mentioned before, a healthy residential market is 5% vacancy. Healthy homeowner rate is 2%.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Please do, yeah.
So just to get back to the historical story here, I don't recall when we looked at Keene's housing analysis, us getting this in-depth into vacancy rate, but and I have a hard time seeing the little print, but I believe we start in 2002.
2002 is the chart on
Is
the left, yes.
And so what was happening in 2002 that brought our vacancy rate down so incredibly low? And I mean, I look back at that time and I remember that was pre-mortgage crisis. The banks were just starting to get a little bit creative with their mortgage policy. And you can see, I think it was maybe around 2008 when the mortgage world collapsed and we started seeing the foreclosures happen, which I'm assuming is what that spike is. But what was
Probably.
driving that low rate prior to that?
I think a lot of it has to do with just this region not having a lot of growth. If you go back to the previous slide that I showed where housing unit growth, it's been since really since the 2000s, which is what we're talking about here. Growth has slowed substantially, and it wasn't keeping up with population and need. So it's been. I think what this is really saying is that this has been a long-term issue, particularly with rentals. As I mentioned before, Keene is an island of rentals where there are very few rentals around Keene. So that's also something to keep in mind when you're looking at the chart. So the law of supply and demand, when you have low vacancies, you often have higher pricing. There's more competition for scarce housing. And we actually reached at one point $350,000 median price home in our region. I believe that was in the summer of 2022. And before this meeting, I looked at a source from Redfin. In Cheshire County now, a median home price is $324,000. On average, it's on the market for about 42 days on average. On the right-hand side of the chart, you can is a chart showing median rent. That continues to go up as well, as you might expect. And looking at the most recent New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority numbers for survey for Cheshire County, two-bedroom in Cheshire County, median goes for $1,441 at this point. One of the things that we did with our regional housing needs assessment is look at people's wages, wage growth versus housing changes in housing cost. And COVID, I think, is fresh in all of our minds, where we talked a lot about essential workers, about these people that are critical to our communities, that we need to work in our restaurants, at our hospitals, at our clinics. We took a look at 15 different occupations and looked at the average, the median wage for these different occupations in Cheshire County, and matched that compared that, to the median home price, which is shown on the left, and the median gross rent, which is on the right. These are both from 2021. And what you see on the left-hand side with housing is that at least with this is one income, I should say, make that clear. But if you look at even someone like an engineer, they're not making enough on their own to afford a median home. Then if you look at some of our essential workers, let's say childcare workers or people working, waiters and waitresses, even if you had a household where two of those people were making those median incomes, they wouldn't wouldn't really come close to the median home price in our region. On the right-hand side, there's a similar story, though not as bad, where one-person households making a lot of different, whether it's a cashier, a construction laborer, or somebody working in retail, they just don't have the budget to afford a median gross monthly rent. Now, when I'm using the term affordable here, what we're looking at is 30% of that person's household, their income, to be able to afford housing. So on this slide, I just want to, a good place to start talking about housing is to discuss population trends and projections, because population is a principal driver for housing need. On this slide, in the dark blue bars, we're showing historic population growth between 1930 and 2020. And then the light blue bars show projected population change between 2030 to 2050. And then the orange line shows historic rate of change by decade. I want to point out a couple of interesting pieces in the chart. Historic data on this chart shows that in 2020 was the first time Southwest New Hampshire actually lost population in a long time. The last time we lost population was 100 years ago in 1920, interestingly. You'll note that the dark blue bar in 2020 is a little bit shorter than the 2010. We lost a couple hundred people, according to the U.S. Census. We had population projections done with a state demographer who looked at all the counties in the state of New Hampshire, and their expectation is that we will continue to grow a little bit into 2030, but after that we'll probably be dropping off in population. That has to do a lot with us relying here, because of our aging population, on in-migration. Because our aging population means our fertility rates are going to be lower. We're producing less of our homegrown population, let's say, and as a result, we need to start thinking about if we want to sustain our regional workforce, for instance, we need to think about migration. And I'm sure you've heard about the Greater Monadnock Chamber strategizing on how we can bring new people into this community. That this is one of the arguments for them doing that. Just want to dive in a little bit deeper on the population. So population is driven by births minus deaths, plus or minus net migration. And this chart here is showing those three components, and it breaks it out in every 5 years between 2000 and 2020. The different bars show the number of cumulative births in purple, deaths in black. That's why it's negative, and migration in orange. When you add up births, deaths, and migration, the result is shown in the light blue bar. And you can see sort of a significant change once we get into the 2010s, right? That once we get to 2010, we had a net population growth of only, and this is for Cheshire County, about 300 people. 2015, that starts sinking a little bit to negative 733, and then we have a slight bump in 2020. But this is by no means strong growth for this area. And you can see here how population, net migration is an important component to keeping the population going. Another driving factor for housing is household size. And I think Camoy and Associates talked about this too, part of their findings. But look at the chart on the left-hand side. It's comparing 2020 to 1940. And what I'm showing here is household size. And you can see, for instance, a one-person household size was only 7% of all the households in 1940. It's jumped up to, it's quadrupled to 28% by 2020. Our household composition has changed tremendously. The inverse is happening with the larger size households. This translates to, if you go back to my earlier point about our pre-1940 housing, it was built originally for larger household sizes. And so we have a large stock of pre-1940 housing that's much larger than what we need for today's households. Incidentally, 55% of the single occupant owner-occupied homes in Cheshire County are 65 and over. These are people that are aging that will start possibly needing some additional assistance. The other big change that's going on, and this is happening nationally, both of these are happening nationally, are family and non-family households. We're seeing less smaller family sizes and more households that are made of unrelated individuals. There's still more families in the region, but it's shifting. We're starting to see more non-related families. Yes, sir.
Councilor Armstrong? Yeah.
Question, you mentioned earlier that the houses built before 1940
Yes,
are less energy efficient.
sure.
Are we making that assumption, or how do we know that? Are we looking at fuel bills, are we looking at square footage to heat?
I think it's based on industry experts knowing that insulation wasn't factored into design of housing in the pre-1940s.
And so the cost of heating a home, however you're gonna do it, is going up because of how we're doing it with fuel oil, right?
Please remember to turn your mic on.
Sorry, I'm saying, so we've got a problem here. We've got much of the housing stock was built before 1940,
Yes.
and it's energy inefficient. So the seniors who can least afford the rising costs of energy are going to be hit pretty hard with rising costs just of operating those facilities. Does your analysis point that out?
I think it's, no, we don't specifically get into that, but I think you can make a logical conclusion that if you're in 1940s housing, that is a challenge that our region faces to try to create more energy efficient homes. We have more inefficient homes, and so that's a challenge that's unique to Southwest region compared to the state or the United States. Some of which are older people living in those homes, but younger people as well. Many of which I noted earlier are rental. A lot of our 1940s housing, I think it was around 40%, are rental housing. And there may not be an incentive to make those more energy efficient.
Ouch.
Yeah. So I want to move on. There's a lot to cover, but go to a next section. That was my the longest section. I'm sure everyone is looking forward to getting out soon. Talk a little bit about key challenges. So some of the challenges we can address at the local and regional level, right? But some challenges are really a little bit out of our hands, are sort of national or statewide. It's more appropriate forum to address these types of issues. And the one big one that I think we're all realize is the inflation, and also COVID had a major impact on the housing industry. On the upper left-hand side, I'm showing that the consumer price index from 2011 to 2023 and how it really jumped after COVID, creating you can see on the right-hand side, the cost of building materials, for instance, jumps partially because of inflation, but also because of supply chain issues. But you'll notice that the spike in lumber is less of an issue now. It's still going up, trending up, but that was more of a supply chain issue that doesn't seem to be as much of an issue. I want to point to the bottom left-hand side where if you were, let's say, like myself, I have a home in Keene, and I have about a 3% mortgage rate. If I'm paying $1,602, and I got my home maybe 14, 15 years ago, and compare that to someone coming into my neighborhood now, where they would maybe faced with a 7% mortgage rate. Look at the difference in how much we would be asking that individual to be spending on their home. Almost a full $1,000 more per month. Interest rate has an incredible effect on affordability. The state has been, there are state challenges, and the state has been trying to address them. You may be familiar with the Invest New Hampshire program, which used some of the COVID stimulus funding to help construct more workforce affordable housing. There were some incentive programs to get communities to permit more affordable housing. Some other things have happened too, to addressing due process, for instance. The state created a housing appeals board so that with planning board decisions, if there was an appeal, it wouldn't have to go to the Supreme Court level, but could go through a housing appeals board to review decisions of planning boards. And then there were legislation for different things like incentives for senior housing and trying to loosen up, and I know Keene has been looking at this, allow for accessory dwelling units allowed by right in single-family zones. Something that the state is going to look at, I think, in the next legislative season is looking at septic systems and what the state currently permits for septic systems. This would affect a lot of the towns around Keene, where communities could achieve higher density and therefore more affordable housing if they can, if there were some relaxing on some of the septic design standards. Local challenges. Septic design, again, if you look on the left-hand side, that's a map of all the water and wastewater lines in southwest New Hampshire. It's very sparse. Most of our communities don't have wastewater infrastructure around Keene. You're unique in that respect. And why is that important? It's because, because you can fit more housing, you can create more affordable housing by creating more dense conditions for housing when you have sewer and water. But you can see on the map, there's not a lot of options. There are sections of, infrastructure. There's infrastructure in Peterborough, Jaffrey, Winchester, Hinsdale, a few other places, but it's very sparse. On the upper right-hand side, I just wanted to point out, we did an analysis of a generalized zoning analysis that looked at permitted uses for 1-family, 2-family, or 3+ family. You can see that our region overwhelmingly is okay with a single-family detached unit. 92% of the land is zoned to allow for that. But when you start talking about duplexes or triplexes, you can see that that changes significantly. We're simply not allowing that duplexes or triplexes as much as we are, the single-family home in this area. Want to finally bring your attention to the bottom right, and this is just a picture of our labor force in our region. We peaked in about 2012, I think that is, and we're losing labor force, primarily because of our aging population again. And Keene is one of the communities that's been hit hard by this. I think, let's see here. In Keene, you lost about 1,350 people in the labor force in the last decade. That was a reduction of about 11%. What's happening, though, is when we're looking at the data that shows migration, most people, say 40 years old to 80 years old, the net migration is pretty flat. So what that means is that there are just as many people coming in and replacing people that move out. So our retirees aren't moving on. They're not moving necessarily in droves to Florida or South Carolina. We have a housing issue for our labor force because we don't have enough extra housing for people coming in to work. But we need these people because our labor force is shrinking dramatically. Okay. Thank you for just a few more points here. As I mentioned earlier, we did some qualitative feedback, qualitative analysis, and one of the things that we looked at was an employer survey. We reached out and heard back from 57 employers representing 18 different communities and 9 different industries. And almost all of them said we need more housing for our employees. It's just really really hard to hire people and to keep people. We also did a community survey. We received 310 responses from people all over the region with different incomes, owners and renters, as well as homeless. And again, most people agree that we need more housing. We need more moderate income housing, rental housing, low income housing. And a lot of people want to see something done about that. On this slide, I want this comes from a housing consultant that worked for the state and the regional planning commissions to try to quantify the need for housing across the state and in the region and in communities. And this upper left-hand chart shows cumulative need for housing by 2040 for the region. Each color represents a different category that they looked at. They looked at what they considered affordable rentals, affordable owner-occupied housing, and market rate rentals and market rate owner-occupied housing. They determined we'll probably need about 4,700 additional units by 2040. In the lower right-hand, that sounds like a big number, but I want to point to the lower right-hand chart, which shows, again, the change in housing units that we've had over time. If you look at the trend line, the amount of housing that we would need to create, it's nowhere close to the kind of growth challenges that we had in the 70s, 80s. So it is, I think the message is that it is doable. It is possible to meet this challenge. This is just a chart showing cumulative housing targets for the entire region, broken down by town, and no surprise, I guess, Keene is up there as the tall bar. These housing targets were based on a couple of things. One was looking at population growth, but the other was workforce needs. And so they looked at labor market areas as a basis for creating housing. And of course, Keene is the dominant job center in the region. And that, between your population and your where the jobs are, a big reason for the bar being so high. A little over 1,000 units up until 2040. Okay, my final slides, and thank you for bearing with me. We have 4 key takeaways in the regional housing needs assessment. One of which is that individuals and households living in Southwest New Hampshire have varied needs that are not sufficiently being met. The toddler toy on the bottom there is meant to represent this idea of one size fits all, that we can't think about. People have different needs, and if you go back and look at the single family unit housing as a mix of our housing portfolio, you can see that it doesn't work for everybody. It's not affordable for everybody. Some two-story buildings are not appropriate for our aging population. So we need to think about the diverse needs of our population, not to mention the homeless and a whole host of other populations that need assistance as well. The other takeaway, housing plays a much more important role than an individual or household shelter. It's an essential ingredient for maintaining a community's vitality. We're experiencing, as I noted before, an unprecedented decline in the labor force, increasing aging population. Housing is critical to making sure that we can have a sustainable labor force in our region. When we're talking about our aging population, social isolation is one of the top health risks that for our aging population. And how do we make sure that people have community and are able to afford their homes and live in neighborhoods? It's really about, a lot of this is about community, not just the individual. Making sure we have healthy and economically vibrant communities. Another takeaway, transportation, water, sewer, energy, and broadband are part of a package of household needs. When we talk about housing, it's really hard to not talk about these other things. Their preferences, their needs that our populations want to have. They express this in the surveys that we received from, survey responses that we received from them. And it's really more, we live in a more complex society. When we're talking about housing, there's a whole package that goes along with it. Not to mention that more affordable communities tend to have a lot of these additional ingredients in their communities, whether it's walking and biking, public transportation, making those communities affordable for people if they have to pay for more expensive housing. And then finally, the historic notion of self-sufficient, rugged individualism, which is the picture at the upper right-hand side, doesn't really square with life in the modern world. We have people with preferences and expectations that are interested in housing, and it's what I think what we're going to need is we talked earlier about looking back at the 2000s, how there was a need for housing, for rental housing back then, that it's only likely to change when there's cooperation and partnerships. It's not just on the backs of the planning boards, but also developers, public policy makers, special interest groups, all need to play a part in improving housing supply and choice. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope that was informative, and happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Mack? I have one question. Your perspective as more of a regional view of things, do you have any suggestions or examples of cross-boundary, if you will, housing solutions that have worked?
I think, well, one of the things, and I think Keene has done this a little bit, is sharing or expanding, if you have additional capacity for sewer and water, that you are working with your neighboring communities to facilitate more affordable housing across boundaries. I think that's an excellent strategy. Another one, it doesn't have to be, another infrastructure to think about is transportation infrastructure, and perhaps looking at public transit as a way to make this area more affordable. A lot of these issues aren't just local. They tend to be regional. They at least tend to slip at least into neighborhoods that are neighboring your community. I'd like to point to the final section of the regional housing needs assessment, which includes a potpourri of different strategies that are available to municipalities to take a look at. If you haven't already heard about something called the New Hampshire Housing Toolbox, I would definitely check that out as well. That has some good ideas, innovative things that a community can do, some of which would require regional cooperation.
Thank you.
Sure.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, moving right along. At this time, I would invite anyone who, on the boards, who would like to bring up new business. Okay. I just want to make one last point. I'm definitely going to look on their site and review their total package there, so I encourage the rest of us to do that as well. Our next meeting will be Monday, December 11th, 2023, 6:30 p.m. And with that, I would like to adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much for your patience. And